Okay. Last week in chapter 23, we saw the death of Sarah and Abraham's negotiations with the Hittites to find a burial place for Sarah, and he bought the cave and the field where Sarah was buried. And then in chapter 24, we saw Abraham's concern to find a wife for Isaac. Abraham is now old, and he's concerned that his son Isaac should find a wife. And so he sent his trusted servant on a mission to find a wife. He didn't want a wife to be found from amongst the Canaanites, but he wanted to send his servant to his own country in Mesopotamia, amongst his own family, to find a wife there for Isaac. And so we saw the servant being put on an oath, swearing an oath to find a wife that would be suitable for Isaac. And so he goes off on his journey into Mesopotamia to the city of Nahor. And when he reached the city, the outside of the city, he came to a well of water. And it was evening time, the time of day when the women would come out to draw water from the well. And the servant prayed and asked the Lord to guide him and to show steadfast love to Abraham. And he set this sort of condition or test which would help him to identify one who would be a suitable wife. That his request to God was that he should say to a young lady, let down your jar that I may drink, and if she says drink and I will water your camels, that would be the indication that that would be the one who would be the wife for Isaac. That's where we reached last week in chapter 24 at verse 14. So we'll pick up the account here at verse 15 of chapter 20, Genesis chapter 24, and we'll read down to verse 21. It says, before he had done speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar upon her shoulder. The maiden was very fair to look upon, a virgin whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, pray give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord, and she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw for your camels also until they have done drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw, and she drew for the camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. So before Abraham's servant had even finished this prayer that he's uttering, a young girl named Rebecca came to the well carrying her water jar on her shoulder. She's identified to us, the readers, as the daughter of Bethuel, and Bethuel was the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, who was Abraham's brother. We've already come across this family back in chapter 22 and verse 23, where we were told of Bethuel becoming the father of Rebekah. So she fits in then with Abraham's requirement that the servant should seek a wife for Isaac from amongst Abraham's own family. And as the readers, we can see from the beginning here how God was in control of events. Rebecca is described in verse 16 as the maiden was very fair to look upon, a virgin whom no man had known. And she set about her task by going down to the spring, filling her jar with water, and then coming up. And there's the way that the description is given here would perhaps suggest that there were some steps that were leading down to the opening of the well. She's going down to it. With her water jar filled, then she would have headed, normally would have headed back to the city and gone home again. But the servant has seen her, noticed her, and so he ran to meet her, indicating his eagerness to start his task of looking for a wife for Isaac. And he spoke to her, asking, pray, give me a little water to drink from your jar. And the girl quickly granted his request, saying, so she let down the jar and she gave him drink. And when she had finished giving the servant a drink, she said, I will draw for your camels also until they have done drinking. So she's going beyond what had been requested of her. The servant had only said, give me a drink. It hadn't mentioned the camels at all. But here she is offering to draw water for his camels as well. So this was the response that the servant had asked for in his prayer for guidance when he'd prayed to God back in verse 14. She quickly emptied her jar into the and she ran back to the well to draw some more water, and she continued to do this until she had drawn enough water for all of the camels. And remember, there were 10 camels here, as we're told in verse 10. It must have been an arduous task, as camels would need a lot of water to drink. Perhaps they would be drinking as much as 25 gallons each, so quite a task for her. Rebecca's willingness to do this indicates for the warfare of the camels and also for the servant as well. We're told in verse 21 now that the servant gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. He seems a bit dumbfounded here. He's just watching in silence as Rebecca is doing this. The passage gives us a sense that things here were happening very quickly, that when the servant saw the girl, he ran to meet her. When he asked for a drink, she quickly let down her jar. We're told she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and she ran back to the well to draw more water for the camels. And while she's working quickly, the servant is gazing at her in silent astonishment. He's wondering, is this girl, is she the answer to his prayer? Has the Lord so quickly prospered his journey that it should be that this first person to come out is the answer to the prayer that he has made? Well, when the camels had finished drinking, the servant then brought out a gold ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets, gold bracelets for her arms, weighing 10 gold shekels. The girl would perhaps have recognized these as being bridal gifts, although at this stage she doesn't know anything about the servant or what his mission is. The servant then asks her whose daughter she is, and he asks if there is room in her father's house for them to stay, for them to lodge. The girl replies by saying that she is the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah and Nahor. And she also goes on to say that they have straw, they have food and provisions for the camels, and there is room in their house for them for these visitors to lodge in. The servant now acknowledges God's blessing and guidance on these events, and bowing his head and worshipping, he says, Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. That's in verses 26 and 27 there. So he praises God for God's steadfast love and faithfulness towards Abraham, for leading him, guiding him to the house of Abraham's family. The girl then went back home and told her mother's household about the things that had happened. There in verse 28, then the maiden ran and told her mother's household about these things. So what had happened here was totally unexpected, and she must have been full of excitement in running back home to say what had happened there at the well. The fact that she went to her mother's household here may suggest that Bethuel had more than one wife. We know he had a concubine who's mentioned in chapter 22, verse 4, whose name was Rumah, by whom he had some other children as well. Or the other possibility is that the house is divided into different sections, and there's the section for the women where the women would stay, and a section for the men. Or another possibility is that Bethuel himself is dead by this time. We may say a little bit more about that later, though. When she goes there to back to her mother's household, and what has happened, that they would also have to confirm the offer of hospitality that she has made to the servant. We're told here as well that Rebecca has a brother named Laban. In verse 29, Rebecca had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man to the spring. Laban, when he saw the gold ring and the bracelets on her arms and heard from Rebecca what the man had said to her, he ran out to the spring where the man was standing with the camels. In verse 29 and 30 there, the text says, Rebecca had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man to the spring when he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms, and when he heard the words of Rebecca his sister, thus the man spoke to me, he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. So Laban runs off as well. So there's a lot of running going along, story here. A lot of things are happening quite quickly here with people running around. So Laban runs out when he sees the ring. The ring that's mentioned there was a nose ring. We learn that from verse 47. Mentions that when the servant reports what he had done, that he put the ring on her nose. So it's not like a engagement ring someone would wear on their finger today, but a nose ring there. And when he saw the bracelets as well, this was something significant, and so he wanted to go and speak to the man who had been talking to his sister. So Laban then warmly invited the man to come to the house. In verse 31, he says, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." And the man then entered the house, and Laban took care of the camels. He unloaded them, so taking off the saddles or whatever that was beyond the camels, and he gave them straw and food to eat. He also provided some water for the servant and the men who were with him to wash their feet. And this is where we learn that the servant isn't traveling alone, there are others with him. So water is provided for them to wash their feet. And all of this was the normal, customary way of showing hospitality when you had visitors. Food was then set before the servant for him to eat, but being eager to fulfill his mission, he said that he would not eat until he had told them of the errand that he was on. And so Laban then invited him to speak on there in verse 33. The servant says, "I will not eat until I have told my errand." He, that's Laban, said, "Speak on." So verses 34 to 49, we have the servant's account of these events, and we'll read through this here. So he said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, men servants and maid servants, camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old, and to him he has given all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my kindred and take a wife for my son. I said to my master, perhaps the woman will not follow me. But he said to me, the Lord before whom I walk will send his angel with you and prosper your way, and you shall take a wife for my son from my kindred and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my kindred. And if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now thou wilt prosper the way which I go, behold, I am standing by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes out to draw, to whom I shall say, Pray give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, drink, and I will draw for your camels also, let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had done speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, pray let me drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will give your camels drink also. So I drank, and she gave the camels drink also. Then I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord, and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. The servant now then gives his account of these events which have led him to Rebekah's home and his request for her to become Isaac's wife. He introduces himself as Abraham's servant, and he recalls how God has greatly blessed Abraham, making him great, giving him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and camels and asses. And he tells of Sarah bearing a son, Isaac, in her old age, and that Isaac is Abraham's sole heir. So he's presenting a good case here for Isaac to become Rebekah's husband, that he's indicating the wealth of Abraham and the fact that Isaac is the sole heir. All of this would be very attractive and make Rebekah a suitable match for Isaac. He speaks also of the oath that Abraham had made him swear concerning where he was to find a wife for Isaac, not from the daughters of the father, from his own kindred. And Abraham's confidence that the Lord's angel would go with him and would guide him and prosper him in this task. He speaks also here of his arrival that day, that same day, when he arrived at the spring of water, and his prayer asking. We notice here in verse 45 that he had been praying this in his heart. He says, before I had done speaking in my heart. So the words that he was praying were not being spoken out aloud, but they were that he was speaking them to himself in his own mind, rather than speaking them out loud. He tells then of his meeting with Rebekah, of how she had responded to his request for a drink of water, and how he had asked her identity, whose daughter she was, that he put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms, and how he had then blessed and worshipped God for leading him in the right way to the daughter of one of Abraham's kinsmen. And he asks that Abraham be dealt with loyally and truly. If they're not willing to give Rebekah in marriage, then they should tell him, let him know, so that he can go and look elsewhere for a bride for Isaac. So the servant has presented his request for Rebekah to become Isaac's wife in such a way that it would really be difficult for Laban to refuse it. If they were to refuse, then it would seem that they were going against God's will, because God, the servant says, God is the one who has directed him here to this place, and God has identified Rebekah as the one to be Isaac's wife. Reading on here then, verse 50 to 61. Then Laban and Bethuel answered, the thing comes from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, and the servant brought forth jewelry of silver and of gold and raiment and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they rose in the morning, he said, "Send me back to my master." Her brother and her mother said, "Let the maiden remain a while, at least 10 days. After that she may go." But he said to them, "Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Let me go, that I may go to my master." They said, "We will call the maiden and ask her." And they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will go." So they sent away Rebekah their sister and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "Our sister be the mother of thousands, of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them." Then Rebekah and her maids arose and rode upon the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. So having listened to the servant's account of these events, Laban, he's Rebekah's brother, and Bethuel, who's Rebekah's father, acknowledged that the thing comes from the Lord and that the Lord has spoken. Just to mention here concerning Bethuel, there are some, Josephus thought that Bethuel, Rebekah's father, was dead by this time, and Bethuel is the name of another brother. That may be a possibility, that it seems to be the brothers who are leading the arrangements. His brother who's mentioned along with the mother, and apart from that mention of the name Bethuel there, there's no other indication of mention of him or him being the father, but it seems to be Laban who is the one who is leading these negotiations or this arrangement that is going on there. So there's a possibility there that the father, Bethuel, the father, may be dead. That's what I do anyway. So they say that they cannot speak bad or good about this. So they acknowledge divine providence has been at work here, and they cannot speak against it, or they cannot oppose it in any way, either good or bad, because they're acknowledging that this is God's will. And they express their willingness then for Rebekah to leave with the servant and so become Isaac's wife. We notice, as mentioned, Laban's role here. Laban seems to play a key role in giving consent to the marriage, which may possibly indicate that the father was dead by this time. The servant reacted to their consent to the marriage by bowing himself to the earth before the Lord and joyfully giving thanks for this. And he then brought out some gifts of jewelry, silver and gold and garments for Rebekah. This would be the dowry, really. And then other expensive ornaments for her brother and her mother, mentioned in verse 53. So having successfully completed the mission which Abraham had sent him on, and probably completing it more quickly than he imagined that he would have happened, the servant and the men with him then ate and drank, and they spent the night there. The servant had declined to eat. He wouldn't eat until this matter had been settled. And then the following morning, the servant asked permission to leave, to be sent back to his master Abraham. However, Rebekah's brother and mother asked that Rebekah should remain with them, they say, for at least 10 days. After that, she may go. The Syriac version puts that as 1 month, that she should stay for one month. The servant, though, didn't want to be delayed. Perhaps he thought that one delay would just lead to another, or perhaps that Rebekah's mother and brother had become reluctant now to let her go so soon. But he was anxious to return to Abraham with Rebekah, now that his work had been completed. And solved the matter by calling Rebekah herself. and asking her to decide for herself whether or not she was willing to go now with the servant. So they ask her, will you go with this man? And she had no hesitation, and she answered, I will go. Rebecca then left her home. Her nurse accompanied her, we're told. We learn her name is Deborah in chapter 35 and verse 8, where her death is recorded. Genesis chapter 35 verse 8 mentions there, Deborah, Rebecca's nurse, died. She was buried under an oak below Bethel. So the name of the nurse is given to us there later. She is also accompanied by other maids who are mentioned there in verse 61 as well. So she's not going alone. She has her nurse there and these other maids as well. And they departed with Abraham's servant and with the men who had travelled with him. And as Rebekah left, her family pronounced a blessing upon her. In verse 60, our sister, be the mother of thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. So they send her off with this blessing. And it really must have been quite an emotional scene here, as her family would have known that they're not going to see Rebecca again. That it's unlikely that she would travel back home again. So this is a final farewell for them. It's not like today where people can travel so easily around or see members of the family in different parts of the world. Much different then. So Rebecca and her maids left, and they rode upon the camels, following Abraham's servant. And verse 61 says, thus the servant took Rebecca and went his way. We come to the final few verses of the chapter now, in verse 62 down to the end here, verse 67. We see the conclusion of the story. Now Isaac had come from Beer Lahai and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field in the evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she alighted from the camel, and said to the servant, who is the man yonder walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, it is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. The scene now shifts then to Isaac. Isaac has moved from Beer Lahai to dwell in the Negeb, in the south of the land there. Back in chapter 16 and verse 14, we learned that Beer Lahai was the place and the location of the well where Hagar had first fled to after she had become pregnant with Ishmael. So one day in the evening, when Isaac went out into the field to meditate, he looked up and he saw these camels approaching. Meanwhile, Rebekah could see Isaac in the distance coming forward to meet them. So she got off her camel and she asked the servant who this man was who was walking in the field to meet them. And on being told it was Isaac, she covered herself with her veil. When the two parties meet up, the servant told Isaac all that had happened and everything that he had done, and Isaac then took Rebekah into his tent and she became his wife. Some of the versions, the English Standard Version, the New International Version, and the Authorized Version have that as Sarah's tent, that Isaac has Sarah's tent and he took Rebekah into Sarah's tent. There's no mention here of there being any sort of marriage ceremony as we would perhaps be familiar with, or any marriage celebration. It's all very informal and very happens all quite quickly, and not much going on in the way of arrangements or anything. But we're told here that Isaac loved Rebekah, And this is the first time they would have met. They've not met before. But Isaac loved Rebekah, and we're told that he was comforted after his mother's death. Abraham is not mentioned in the account of the servant's return with Rebekah. He's not mentioned at all here, and the servant refers to Isaac as my master. When he's speaking to Rebekah, he refers to Isaac as my master. So both Abraham and Isaac were his master, really, in that sense. Isaac being the heir. So the story has a happy ending here with Rebekah becoming Isaac's wife, and the love that they had for each other, and the comfort that she brought to Isaac following the death of his own mother. There's a few things perhaps for us to think about here. How is God's providence demonstrated in this story? How do we see God working things out through this story? And does God still work in a similar way today? Can we see God at work in our own lives in that way? And then what differences do you note in the marriage customs between then and now? How is a marriage arrangement different today to how it was being done back then? So there's a few things for us to think about there.